All right, hello once again. This is the Sovablu Read. This is our take on technology and the modern enterprise. Once again from Tokyo, Japan, this is Annie. And once again from Amsterdam in the Netherlands, it's Loek Berendsen. Hi, Loek. Good to see you again.
Hi, Annie. Great to see you again today.
So, Luke, last time in our second episode, we talked a lot about a comparison between how things are in Japan and how things are in Europe. And afterwards, it kind of got me thinking that people like us who've spent so much of time in Japan working with enterprises, we have developed certain preconceived notions about how the enterprise works. Fair disclosure, my opinions might be biased towards the Japanese side, obviously, because I've been here for so long. But I'm keen to know how Europe responds to certain questions I have, right? So in that context, today I would like to ask you some questions based on how are things different, more focusing on the decision-making process, how big decisions are taken, whether it's on strategy or technology or whatever, how do things work? So let's get started with the first one, right? And this is an interesting one because in our experience, we often see that when we walk into a room for a meeting, and there's usually one or more persons who are responsible for taking that decision, right? But it's often quite challenging to figure out who is the person who's actually making that final call. Is it the person I'm meeting right now, or is it somebody else behind the scenes, or is it somebody completely different, right? So even before a potential solution or an idea is approved, the decision-making process goes through various channels and not necessarily the most efficient ones. So it's very important to understand who is in the room. Who are you talking to, right? So my question is, what happens in the European decision-making room? What happens when you walk into a room proposing something, and how do you really reach that point of decision-making?
So, Annie, I've been on that seat myself, of course, in the decision-making process, and together with the tactical people around it, and also even the operational people. And there's, of course, some stakeholder management involved, because the person who wants to create a change in the business, that's your person you should talk to. That's the person who should be in front of you. And of course, it depends on the company size and on the company culture and many more factors. And of course, the size of the new desired state or solution. What you often see is that let's call it the change maker, already has a very strong idea of the direction he or she wants to go towards to. He's doing some soft stakeholder management within the company, because people need to join the train of change. And it really depends on that person, how the change-making process is being done. Because I've been in businesses where it's a broader business decision, and you involve maybe 100 people. But I've also been working on changes which were a huge investment. And there it was just a business case. Whereas the takeoff of decision elements within the company. So it's really about understanding the business culture, how the process runs. And the process of the change is, of course, also influenced by the culture of the country where the head office is based. So it's not tit for tat. It's not like one way forward. It has different elements in it, and it can clash as well, because I'm Dutch. I'm like, okay, let's make a decision. Let's have 5 or 10 people. And then suddenly you realize in this company, the culture of decision-making is different.
One of the things we've often observed is that, every company has these people who are very good at identifying what the problems are, right? They really have a knack for it. they
They're
are able,
attracted to problems.
they're attracted to problems, and they're usually the first ones to say, hey, you know what, something's not
Mm.
right.
Mm.
But that does not mean that they have a strong voice when it comes to deciding what is the right solution for that problem. Is that the same that you've seen in the interactions that you've had so far, that it's not necessarily that the person who identified the problem has a significant voice at the decision making level for the solution as well?
Yes and no again. Because I've seen people who then take the end-to-end responsibility to actually
Mm,
also make the change. So they
mm,
go through the full process of including all departments who are involved, all
mm, mm,
decision makers, and they really take the accountability of making the change happen.
mhm.
Um, but you also have those that are like, we just joked about it, like attracted to problems. They identify
Yeah.
them and they make a reason for change,
Mm,
and then they hand it over to the people who then start running with it.
mm,
So it depends on the company size, how it's structured. Some just identify, make a really strong business case around it, and then hand it over to the people who make it happen. And
mm,
sometimes you have that person in front of you who then says, okay, but I
mm,
also see the light at the end of the tunnel, how it should work.
yeah.
Let me take ownership and start running with this. And running is
Mm.
very literally like, talking to people, making the engagement, influencing the decision makers, etc.
Is it also because of the way technology is perceived in terms of, is it a cost center, or is it something that actually creates value? And these are two different conversations, right? Because when you look at technology as a cost, purely as a cost, then it is the first one that gets sacrificed or compromised on when the business is in a bit of trouble, right? Because it's the easiest cost to cut. In another scenario, it could be a strategic value creator where the business can only succeed and become better if technology plays a bigger role or a better role. So there are two different points of view here.
Yes.
And
Yes.
in some of the best companies that we have worked with, we've always seen that technology is more of a value creator, right? It actually adds value to the way the business is delivering their services and delivering customer value and all of that. So, in your perception and experience, do you see companies, especially today, enterprises today, looking at technology as a cost center, or has the conversation shifted more towards technology being a value creator?
You touched upon the topic that's very close to my heart. Um, but first, to start with your question, yes, companies are moving away from saying it's a cost element. Because change is value creation.
Mm,
There is a reason why you want to make that change, do the investment, having
mm,
a
mm,
new backend system, new front end, new contact center system, whatever it is.
mm.
Um, and it's not necessarily seen as a cost anymore, but they struggle with translating how
Yeah.
to map the fact that it is a cost. It's the old thinking, the
Mm,
dinosaur is still running around, or the purple crocodile. How do you then say, oh, okay, this is a cost, but how do we make it a benefit? And then we hit on the point where I'm always preaching, every decision should be about human experience.
mm,
It should be about the employee. It should be about the customer.
mm.
And if you make a change, doesn't matter what it is. Okay, what's in it for the customer?
Yeah.
Because if you take that approach, you have the right approach, because then you can always say, okay, this is the benefit, this is the value.
Mm,
And then only afterwards, okay, it's cost this much, but it will bring us
yeah.
this much. You
Yeah.
should start your business case, your desire for change,
Mm,
not from a ego point of view or oh, this is a great tool point of view.
mm,
No, it should be
mm.
about the customer, the internal
Yeah.
customer. They struggle. They want
Yeah.
a better work life. So
Yeah.
how do we create it?
Mm.
Let's start looking for solutions.
Yeah. So it's not really an expense or a dead expense that you just have to write off at some point, but more of an investment in the future, because it's like you said, it's delivering value for your employees or for your customers that you're working with. So
Yeah.
that's definitely an interesting thought for sure. So the next thing that kind of comes into my mind is when you're talking about investment in technology and uh, looking for the returns, etc. I think another important aspect is choosing the right solution, choosing the right vendor, the right solution
Mm,
provider.
mm,
And when you do that, there are obviously various factors that you have to weigh to come to that correct decision.
mm,
Right?
mm,
In many of our observations, we've seen that this shortlisting or even the final decision is already made up even before a vendor is ever called in for an interaction or an evaluation, because uh, the criteria that you set are so strict that you can only choose from somebody you've already worked with,
mm,
or you have a very clear choice that okay, this is the only one that really matters.
mm,
And essentially what happens is that when you send out the theoretical request for proposal, uh, even though the criteria is set, the evaluation parameters are set, in the back rooms, the decisions have already been made. So the RFP becomes more of a formality rather than an actual process. But then the question is that what are the key factors that these enterprises are really weighing? Is it something specific to technology, something specific to business, or a combination of everything? What are the key elements that contribute to this decision making process or this evaluation process?
uh, in Dutch, we say that's a hot potato,
That
which
sounded like
means
that.
it's
That sounded like English, though.
yeah. Um, it's about it's a sensitive topic because
Yeah.
is the decision making happening in politics,
Hmm.
company politics, or is it happening uh, in a fair process?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And I've been lucky and privileged enough to be part of a setting up a governance actually
Mhm.
around this decision making process. Because if the decisions are being made behind the curtain all the time,
Hmm.
then you can't influence them in the right way if needed.
Yeah.
Um, so you need to have a very clear process around it. And
Hmm.
if you start comparing solutions, it should be done the right way, the same topic, the same outcome, the same input, the same needs, the same criteria over and over.
Hmm.
And not even for the solution, but also the impact on the governance itself, the
Yeah.
impact on the experience, the impact on the employees, the impact
Hmm.
on the business processes. So if you start comparing solutions with each other, you should compare all those elements for each of the solution.
Hmm.
And coming back to what I said 5 minutes ago, it's about why are we making this investment? It's about the customer or the
Yeah.
employee experience.
Right.
And if
Right.
you take that approach, you should have criteria on how will it benefit the customer? How
Hmm.
will it limit the impact on the employee? How will we become a more lean organization and speed up processes?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because if you take that approach, you suddenly start to evaluate all the solutions and the business providers very neutral. You don't
Right.
have the angle of, hey, this is the perfect solution. No,
Yeah.
you have the angle of this is in for the customer and the employee.
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of, since we are talking about technology and the modern
Mm,
enterprise,
mm,
in the times that we live in, where economic pressures and all kinds of other things happening around
mm.
us often have a strong influence on the decision making process, right? So when you're evaluating enterprise software, right, enterprise solutions, what would be maybe a couple of two or three things that most enterprises would be looking at, because they have a larger scale and a lot more to lose if a wrong decision is made.
I think one that's interesting for both business and the technology department is time to market,
Right.
both for the customizations as the regular maintenance.
Mm.
because that's a huge factor and often an expensive one.
Yeah.
Also, not necessarily expensive of making the investment, but
Mm.
expensive if it takes a long time to develop new,
Yeah.
capabilities in the
Yeah.
tool. That's a very important one. And of course, the support. How does the support look like? Is
Mm.
everything done in-house? Do we work a lot with the partner? How does that look like? How does the frame around this look like?
Interesting.
Um, the last one is more on really having the right capabilities of the tool.
Mm.
In the end, it is, of course, a checklist, because if you compare 5 vendors with each other, you start comparing them. And then in the end, you need to have a lot of check in the boxes to really make the right decision.
Mm.
And yes, all those factors influence the decision making. Um, and in the end, it's also about having the people in front of you,
Yeah. Yeah.
who will showcase the experience and understand your problem as an enterprise and how you feel about them being capable of helping you in making your life easier as an
Yeah.
enterprise.
Yeah. 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 The reason you may be wondering why I'm smiling at that response, because it brings up something interesting. In Japan, there's this almost everybody who's worked with Japanese customers, they are familiar with this concept of decision making by consensus, right? Everybody has to agree on the right choice. Now, in that statement, everybody has to agree on the right choice. The key word here is everybody has to agree on the right choice. Part of it is another question altogether. That's often left unresolved. But as long as everybody agrees, it's the right choice. I think that's a better way to frame it.
Yep. Yep.
Doesn't mean the right choice actually has been
Mm,
made. That basically means that in our experience, the decision making process, or what is the final choice made, often does not relate to the correct vendor. Like you were just saying, that somebody coming to you with experience, with a beautiful solution, and presents itself as the perfect choice.
mm,
But if the decision makers don't agree on it,
mm,
that may not be the one that's actually chosen, because not everybody agrees, right? There's no
mm,
consensus.
mm,
And this is something which really hurts businesses here in Japan. It
mm,
often affects us as well, because we are
mm,
on the receiving end of this consensus problem. Do you see decision making happening in Europe a little differently? That when taking your example itself, that when people come and when a company sees that, okay, this is definitely the right solution, even if there is a disagreement within the committee or whatever,
mm.
do they still go for that, or do they feel, no, 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 let's go with what most of us agree on, because it seems to be the easier option or the convenient one?
If the approach is done correct, and if you have your, I wanted to say pre-process, but that's not even fair, because the consensus should happen on what do we need.
Right, right.
And you wrap that up, nice ribbon around it,
Mm.
and then this is the pack, this is what we need. And then it
Yeah,
should go along the conveyor belt towards the
yeah.
next phase, where we start looking into vendors
Mm.
promising us that they can meet those expectations.
Mm, mm, mm,
And that's actually a much smaller group of people making that type of decision.
mm.
So you don't want to have the big group of decision makers and consensus people in that final decision making, um, because that final decision making, that should be a smaller group with main
Yeah,
stakeholders, someone from the
yeah.
technology department, from customer service, from logistics, maybe from whoever is in the room.
Mm.
Um, and they should really stick to, this is what we need. And yes, of course, it can always tip left or right on some final nuances, and
Yeah,
how maybe pricing is a little bit more interesting over having
yeah.
all needs covered. So it's yeah.
Yeah, it probably depends on what is that critical differentiator, or what are the limitations that you have to work within. Sometimes the
Yeah.
best solution may not be affordable. So you have to
Yes.
compromise. Yeah, that makes
Yes.
sense.
Yes. Yeah.
Hmm. Interesting.
And I think it's nowadays more and more important. And even as as an end customer like me, I want to be in control. So if we're able to work with a solution provider that puts us in control,
Hmm.
I think that's the best way forward, because enterprises don't want to. They want to be taken care of.
Hmm.
So either you do everything for them, but then usually you have like some noise in between,
Yeah.
because the business is not able to provide enough information so that they can be taken care of, or you put them more in control where they can work themselves on the tooling and the solution, and
Hmm.
work really closely with those who are developing and programming it,
Hmm.
because then there's no noise.
Hmm. That's an interesting point because in Japan we have this category of people in the organization called the
Mm,
Gemba, which is essentially the people on the floor, right?
mm,
People who are actually executing
mm,
the business and running the operations on a day-to-day basis. And managerial level people at that level
mm,
have tremendous amount of influence on uh, choosing which vendor to go with or which solution to
mm,
go with.
mm,
Um, so sticking on to this current point that we are talking about, do you think the middle management in
mm,
major enterprises in Europe have
mm,
a stronger influence on that decision, or is it more like a top down? Like if the CEO decides, that's what happens. It doesn't really matter what the middle management thinks
mm,
or wants. Here,
mm,
that the top down thing is quite rare. Very few large Japanese companies are top down. Most of it is kind of run by the middle management.
mm.
I'm curious to know what is the proportion a little different? Do you think most European companies are top down and decisions are taken at the top level, especially when it comes to enterprise technology? Where is the real power?
The real power is with the people who walk in the trenches. It's not necessarily the people on the floor or in
Mm,
a very specific department, but it's a layer in between. And I've seen, sadly enough, also situations where most cutoffs, layoffs are being done in the middle management, and
yeah.
that creates even more friction between the layers of strategy and the operational, because you
Mm, mm,
struggle with the translation and real life situations.
mm,
Not the decision making is happening on the operational tactical, but it's influenced, and the business case is written on that part, where you say, okay, this is what we struggle with, this is a solution that we're looking into, this is the change that we want to create, so
mm,
we
mm,
will all
mm.
benefit from it. And then of course budget needs to be made available from CEO,
Yeah, yeah,
CTO, what
yeah.
have you.
Mm,
um, but I'm like 80% of decision making happens in tactical.
I see.
Yeah.
The next thing I wanted to talk about is um, something we've also seen here quite a bit of is that most of the business deals that are signed or agreed upon uh, happen mainly because of an existing situation like a status quo, right? It's not that a competitor is coming and disrupting anything. The whole idea of disruption is quite limited in Japan. It's probably
Mm,
more seen in the US and Europe, in other much more you know volatile markets. Japan is a little more consistent. They
mm,
rarely switch vendors quickly unless there's something very very wrong with it. So as a result, what happens is there is a status quo in terms of the solution that is in use for a very very long period of time. Even if that solution gets increasingly weaker and weaker in meeting the requirements of your business as it evolves, right? So your business is growing, your scale is growing, you're diversifying into different spaces or markets or whatever, but the solutions are not really keeping up. But they're still there
mm,
because everybody's comfortable with it. They don't want to change it too much, right? So even when there are better solutions. So the whole procurement process or solution selection process is not always designed to find the best solution. It is to avoid the risk of getting it wrong or making the wrong
Mm.
choice. Right?
Mm.
If you remember in the first episode, we talked about Japan being risk averse or change
Yes.
averse.
Yes.
And that factors into everything that happens here in the
Mm.
decision making process as well. That
Mm.
uh, the final solution is probably the most convenient one, like we were talking about a little while ago.
Mm.
So if that's the one that we're already using, let's just stick to it. It's fine if it's not meeting 50% of our requirements. So in Europe, what would be the factors that, often the better solution loses out to the one that's already in use? Is it the same thing that we see here in Japan, that the reversion to risk or change, or is it something else? What's your observation?
Um, they are afraid of the workload and being able to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to replace a large enterprise solution, the operational layers need to deal with it.
Yeah.
And in Europe, that's seen as the biggest risk because the organizations are so lean, they cannot deal with an extra workload. And the work that is being done additionally, it needs to be covered by very specific individuals in the organization. They often don't have sufficient experience in it. It's something new. They're really good at their job and they're being pushed forward like, hey, you deal with this new implementation,
Yeah.
this new situation. And what you then see on top of that is that external people are being brought in.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they help you in the process of change, of like, getting stuff done.
So these would be the consultants, basically.
Yes, consultants.
Mm-hmm.
But in 12, 18 months, they leave again.
What you're essentially saying is that you bring in these consultants and you get them to do bit of the work, and then once they're out of the picture, the final objective still hasn't been met. Right? You still have potentially an incomplete solution or inadequate solution.
Yes, yes.
So I think again you're back to square one, which is where you started. That you started with a solution that was not meeting your needs. You put in a lot of effort and money and people into that solving that problem, but then several months down the line or a couple of years down the line, you're back to square one. So how does that really solve the problem in any scenario?
A fair question. And then you only replace the technicalities,
Yeah.
and that's why I always raise my hand. Like, we need to think about the employee because they need to use the new system and the
Yeah.
new way of working, and they need to
Yeah.
be aligned and they need to be involved from day one. They need to understand the decision process and then slowly through all the steps that are being taken up to the end.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they need to convey the message and the teaching and everything that needs to happen to the rest of the group. Because only then the new solution is being carried in the organization. And that's what you need.
It's very, very interesting. And it still makes me wonder that why there are so many companies around the world who obviously are doing very well. They're very successful companies. Usually their business strategies are spot on, but we see a completely different thing going on, or a process or a thought process going on when it comes to choosing technological solutions. And now that we're somewhat down this conversation, it reminds me of where we started. That sometimes it's not about identifying the problem and finding the perfect solution. It's about just moving forward with consensus and seeing where we end up. So it's more like a trial and error method rather than putting in the real thought and planning required to identify the right
Yes.
and solution in the longer term.
Yes. Yes.
So is that where we are stuck at always?
Thanks for making me feel old because Now I can talk about how I see it changed in the last 2 decades
Yeah.
of how technology and changed and digital tools are being managed has
Hmm.
changed. And sadly, I will not say evolved. It has
Hmm.
just changed.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because people work together on change
Yeah.
and they decide together in consensus if something looks good enough, and then they move on and they go to the next one.
Yeah.
Or they stay in that rhythm of changing something else in that same frame bandwidth.
Right. Right. Right.
And then my question is, how do we take the ownership? Where is the person who's taking ownership of
Hmm.
making a bigger change and saying, hey, we cannot deal with this bandwidth anymore. We need to
Hmm.
grow. We need to go to the next step. We need something
Yeah.
better, a better tool, a better
Yeah.
solution, a better
Yeah.
backend.
The evolution of the
Um,
solution as well.
exactly.
Hmm.
And then the accountability and responsibility kicks in, because if you have people only responsible for little snippets in the organization,
Hmm.
who's responsible for the bigger part? And
Hmm. Hmm.
starting the conversations on, hey, it's great what we're doing within the tool and within the process, but how do we start having the conversation
Yeah.
on the tool and
Yeah.
who's taking ownership of this?
Hmm. So that perfectly, again, once again, leads me to the next one. That when you're talking about what I think essentially what you were trying to say is who's accountable, who's responsible
Mm,
for that
mm,
decision and
mm,
takes accountability for the outcome, right? And what we often see is that when it comes to enterprise decision making in the context of choosing the right solution
mm,
and you're evaluating different vendors,
mm,
it's not necessarily the vendor that's the best, but the
mm,
vendor that is potentially recommended or vouched for by a similar user. And this is something we've experienced so many times here in Japan that, when we onboarded one of our early customers, Hoshino Resorts in Japan, at the similar time, maybe slightly later, slightly after that,
mm,
we started interactions with another potential company. And they were on the fence for a long time. They weren't
mm,
really sure because we were relatively new in the market.
mm,
And they kept on asking us about how things are going with this pilot customer, that initial customer that we had,
yeah,
we've been working with for
yeah,
a year or more. So we got them together. 1 week after they had this conversation, they decided to choose our platform, which had taken 6 months before that, of conversations going on, we were going back and forth.
it's partially similar
Hmm.
because, word of mouth is the best recommendation you can get
Mm.
to make such an investment.
Yeah.
And um, it does happen, but it depends on the market, how the dynamics are around it, because some of the markets in Europe are relatively small.
Mm.
So it's depending on solution, it's not as easy to find a peer in the same sector with the same everything, which is like a copy, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you talk to them. And if you do it cross border, then you hit the culture aspect where maybe a person gets convinced, but then it's part of the culture, the way of
Mm.
working, or the company culture where they still say, yeah, that's great, but we have these rules
Mm.
and we
Mm.
need to follow the rules. So,
Mm.
of course, it will be influenced, but it really depends on the market.
Mm. That's actually very interesting because one thing that we've also seen coming out from all of this is
Mm,
the conversation changes the moment we reach a point where, let's not just talk, let's actually show this to you, let's
yes,
demonstrate the
yes,
capability, right?
yes.
You don't have to believe us, you don't have to believe what we're saying, or you don't have to believe the sales pitch. Obviously it's our product, we would
Mm,
love it if you would use it, but you don't have to take us at face value. Give it a
mm,
shot, right? And
yeah,
then the conversation shifts to, okay, so how do we do that?
Yes.
And usually we propose that in the form of a proof of concept, a POC. And in our experience so far, we've seen that almost all POCs that we've done in Japan have resulted in conversions. So it's becoming more and more obvious to us that the proof of the pudding is in its eating, as they say it.
Yeah.
So you can pick up a small module, you can pick up a small flow from your existing system and try a POC. And if it works well, then you move to the final decision process, right? In your experience, when you've negotiated with customers for any kind of deal, any kind of business proposition, how do you get them to say yes?
It's never about us.
Yeah.
That's the first piece. It's about asking a lot of questions and then going deeper. So they give you a little snippet of their problem and then you go deeper. Little snippet of the problem, then you go deeper. And that's the process. And then what helps is talking about the emotion around the challenges that they're facing. What then happens is that you slowly start moving towards a summary, confirming what they said, linking not a solution, but similar situations so that they know you identify yourself with them in that process, that you dealt with similar situations or similar clients, etc. And then it actually usually, it can, let's say it like this, it can either stop and you send a follow-up where you map out like, hey, you mentioned this is how we deal with this in our solution, in our offering, in our service, and no matter what it is. Or it starts to happen already in that conversation. Like, hey, I hear you mentioned this is how we deal with it in our solution, our tool, and our service offer. So it's all about the customer and showing that you have the experience or the knowledge or the consistency or anything in that bucket to serve them and help them in their needs. Being flashy and saying, hey, this is going to fix all your problems. This is how it looks like. This is it. It never works.
Yeah, I think which is why the POC really helps, because then they have something tangible to base their decision on. It's not just our sales pitch and their guesswork. It's really proving whether what you've been claiming is possible or not. And especially in our domain, when we talk about certain things, the certain capabilities of our platform, we've often faced that reaction that, hey, this sounds too good to be true. So we are always very keen to tell our customers, potential customers, that, hey, you know what, just let's do a POC and see where we go. And after that, there's no commitment. If you like it, we continue the conversations. If you don't feel it's meeting your requirements, then we move on. So,
if I may allow to have an analogy on this, it's like buying a new car. You go to the sales guy of the car dealership, and he or she can tell you all about the car and the fancy elements and the buttons and the technology. But once you're taking a test ride, you know it. Like, this
absolutely.
is me.
It's a feeling.
Or it's actually like, it's not me because something's off.
Absolutely.
And that's why we need the POC.
And I think software is also very similar. Some of the best systems or solutions that we use today are the ones that that don't stress us out. And I think enterprise solutions like ours also must deliver a similar experience. It should take the stress away and not introduce a new kind of stress. And I think on that note, we'll have to wrap up today's episode. Thanks everybody for joining in today. That was the Sovablu Read, our take on technology and the modern enterprise. Till next time, goodbye. Thank you.